we've had some challenges. We expected that we would have difficulty in getting our data to our collaborators. And we weren't surprised by that. It took time, but we got through it. Most of our archives are in tape. And so going from tape to disk and then over the wires to the cloud folks, the 5 cloud providers that are our cooperative research and development agreement, cooperative research and development agreement partners. It took a while, and it takes time, but we knew that. The surprise was how much we'd have to work with our collaborators to help them understand the opportunities for leveraging NOAA data in the private sector. We had an inkling of that when we first went out with our request for information. And I guess it wasn't that big a surprise, but it was something that has been taking more time than we anticipated when we started this effort almost 2 years ago. We went out with a request for information originally, thinking that based on the responses, we'd put together an RFP and we'd award a contract. And when we had these sessions, people came to us and they said, well, if you give us money, we can make your data available. But we already knew that. And the idea of our big data project isn't about buying a bunch of infrastructure and having people come. It's about coming up with a new business model for open data. When the open data initiatives came out of the administration, in fact, one of the first things that was signed by President Obama was an open data executive order. I think he signed it on day 1 or day 2 of his administration, almost over 7 years ago now. When he did that, it's a great idea. It's something that NOAA has been supporting. The fact that our data is accessible is the reason why there's a weather industry today. That's not hyperbole. The companies that provide you weather forecast information and are our dear partners in the weather enterprise don't own weather satellites. The American people own weather satellites and NOAA flies them. Many of them do own supercomputers, but the basic forecasts that many forecasts are based upon are the American people's supercomputers that are operated by NOAA. Some of them have, some local TV stations have Doppler radar, a few, many more are getting out of it. The radars that you see when you see satellite/radar on the big map of the United States on the evening news, that's a NOAA radar. The American people's radar operated by NOAA. So we already get all of our data out there. And the weather industry adds enormous value in making sure that people understand the science behind the weather and what's really happening, and they add great value in what's going to happen on that block or what's likely to happen in this area. But they're building upon the raw data that the people pay us to gather and analyze and then make available. So we know how to do that. The big data project isn't about doing more of the same. It's about seeing if there's a business model that can allow us to make more data available without costing the taxpayers more money. The idea is that if additional data sets can enable climate prediction or microclimate for the next 6 months, what's going to likely to happen on this shoreline, support the reinsurance industry, support agriculture, support transportation. If people can build businesses, just like the weather industry did, and monetize the data that we gather, then a piece of that profit that they make, a piece of their revenue, I guess, get it right, can go to cover our costs to making the data available to them, and therefore, and thereby, enable entire industries to be promoted without having to spend additional taxpayer dollars. So when we put out the RFI and the folks came to us and they said, so if you give us money, we can make that data available, we said, no, that's the old one. who understands what we're talking about? And there were lots of folks who said, oh, I can make money on that. And we said, great, what are your ideas? And they said, well, here's an idea or two, not sure if it'll really work. And they said, well, how much is it going to cost to get access to your data? And we said, gee, we don't have a cost accounting system that tells us that today. And if we're going to be putting it in the cloud and hosting it, and you're going to be accessing it next to the compute, we haven't done that before, so we got to figure that out. So we've got these two big things that people have to figure out. We got to figure out what can I make money doing, and how much is it going to cost us to get it to them, which implied we have to do research. So instead of entering into contracts with the folks who responded to our RFIs, we entered into 5 cooperative research and development agreements. So the things we expected, because your question, that's a lot of background, but your question was what are the surprises? So the things we expected were that we were going to have to figure out what it was going to take to most efficiently get the data to our collaborators. They were going to have to figure out, and we knew we had some challenges, as I said at the beginning, we knew it was going to take some time and we'd have to optimize it and we'd have to deal with some of the infrastructure challenges. And the collaborators were going to have to figure out what kind of money they could make on what kinds of data sets. The surprise was that we were going to have to collaborate with our collaborators so extensively on both. So, because the most important thing is to get value out of the data, we've been spending most of our time on getting data to the collaborators, working with them so they understand what the data really means, so making connections between the collaborators who are cloud providers and not necessarily subject matter experts in climate data or weather data or ocean data or fisheries data, and you would expect them to be. But we've been helping them make the linkages to those communities so they can start seeing the business cases. Now we're turning to our piece of the research and development, which is what does it take for us to optimize our getting data to the collaborators so they can do their thing. And we've already had some successes. And the surprise, the challenge is coming up with more of them, but I guess we expected that there would be value, and it's not a surprise to find that there is value. But one of the things that we've discovered is that we put our radar data up in the web of our collaborators, and we transferred the data to them. And there's the entire history of weather radar data is now available in the cloud. And if somebody wants to access it, they can download it for free. If they want to use it in the cloud of the cloud provider that's holding it, they can pay to use it, or they can just download it for free. In the process, once all that data was up there, not only did the collaborators discover a dramatic increase in traffic to their cloud, which is what they're about, that's a good thing, we discovered a dramatic decrease in access to those historical radar data sets from our archive, which is a really good thing, because that means that we can control the growth in the cost that the American taxpayers have to fund, while entire industries may be stimulated by accessing the very same data in a much more accessible place. That would be the cloud of our collaborators. So you asked about surprise. It's a very pleasant surprise. It's what we hoped, I guess, would happen. And we're seeing it. And we're also seeing, here's a surprise, here's another pleasant surprise. We knew that people would want to use the data for climate purposes and research. What didn't occur to us is that the data that we've put up there, one of the data sets we put up there, is of very high granularity. And if you're doing the weather, then you ignore the noise that might come from birds or bees or other kinds of things. And you focus on the return signal that you get from a raindrop or a snowflake or a cloud or something of, or a weather front, something of meteorological interest. Well, there are people who care, as you'd expect, about bird migration and insect behavior, and they didn't know because to everybody else it was noise. So it was, but that was to the noise of a weather forecaster or a climatologist is the signal. If you're looking at bird migration or bees and how they're behaving, so that was a really pleasant surprise that it was something we hoped for. And not only would the expected uses be found, but unpredictable uses as people get the data and they can find it easy to access. They can find all sorts of new purposes, and that's a great thing. There are other lessons learned that we expected. We knew that we have to worry about the quality of the data. Some of the data we've put out, the collaborators look at it, and people try to use it, and they say, do you know you've got this systematic error in your metadata? And that's ours to fix. It's our job. But what's really cool now is instead of some researcher who happens to download something and finds a mistake that we missed and tells us so we can go back and fix it, now we have all these extra eyes, and they're looking at all this data. And so when we make a fix, instead of fixing one data set, it can fix 30,000 data sets at the same time. So we're getting efficiencies in our own quality control that we didn't anticipate. So that's a really nice surprise too. So no bad surprises, just good ones.